The theme of the lecture is Teachers and Teaching in Tomorrow's Schools. I invite Professor Sarangapani to deliver the lecture.
Thank you, Sonika. Sonika contacted me sometime last month and invited me to deliver this talk. And I was really delighted. I remember launching the series, which we instituted here in the BA program in JVC in '95. I think it was at one meeting where Gijubhai and distance application, Padma and I were deliberating and thinking about the growth of this program in college. And I think it was Gijubhai who suggested that we should institute such a forum and invite scholars to engage with deep thinking on education issues as a part of this community. And as Sonika pointed out, the first talk was given by Prof. I remember inviting Ashish Nandi to chair the talk. Tata has supported us with resources to launch the series. So I'm really honored to be back at JVC and to be asked to give this talk. And I'm extremely delighted to be invited back to do this by one of my own students, Sonika, from the second grade batch. I was just wondering when I was speaking to Shirley earlier whether I should allude to it, but I still remember the day when I stormed out of college with an angry protest letter because we were not being taken seriously in the college. And I was thinking that this letter would make sure that the issue gets addressed. And I was suddenly forced into growing up because my letter, which included this last line of angry and I hereby resign, that part of the letter was taken seriously, nothing else was. And I found myself without a job the next day. So I really grew up very fast after that experience. I realized that institutions don't work the way humans do. They work in institutional ways. And if you're going to say something, you better make sure that you mean it. So I think it was hard learning, but it's good. I think good things came out of it because I moved out of Delhi and I began to look at life in India and education and teacher education from a position outside Delhi, which I think is really important because it gives you a perspective on things and it makes you realize that the world is much larger than it. Anyway, I finally moved to TSS where I now work with the Center of Excellence in Teacher Education. Sonika suggested that I could speak on some aspect of science education, maybe, as Shirley pointed out to me, recognizes Sunita's many years of work here at this institute. We were colleagues together. And it would probably be relevant to all of you students of the BA program to think about an area like science education. But instead, I thought I would do something different. I didn't want to prepare too much. I've been out of touch with science education for a long time. So I thought instead I will draw on some research that we're doing more recently in the CT. We've just been awarded a research grant to estimate the requirements of schooling in the 21st century. Of course, we're already in the 21st century, but this study expects us to project into the future 30 years. So it's an interesting exercise with which we've all been involved. And I thought I would share with you something from that study and think with you together on this whole question of schools knowledge shaping different from today. I want to think a little bit about society, economy, our material and social cultures, and I want to think about schools and relationships. In the second part, I want to explore how it affects our normative ideas, which could guide framing curriculum and pedagogy. And in the third part, I want to reflect on our practice as teachers and on the profession of teaching. Let me say to start with that I have generally been a skeptic of this whole futures business. Whenever in the past people have talked about preparing for the future, I've been inspired by Dewey's philosophy that the best preparation for the future is preparing for the present. The best preparation that you can do for the present is not to prepare for the future. And I've generally been a votary of that view of this whole business of preparing for the future. Nevertheless, when I think about experiences pretty much hitting us since COVID, and for me, COVID is a very, very important turning point, I feel that somehow this way of thinking about the future in relation to the present is not good enough. And I want to start by just telling you a little bit about why I think we are in a moment of profound change. And simply thinking about the future in terms of the present is not going to be enough. So all of us have been through COVID in 2020. It's 5 years old. And every citizen globally was caught in a situation of deep disruption. It's a kind of disruption that we associate with marginalized groups, or groups caught in educational emergencies, groups caught in conflict. But this disruption affected all of us. And I think this disruption is not an ordinary disruption. In fact, scholars have described it as shock temporality. It is a moment of shock. And I think we need to internalize that even though today we've almost forgotten that period, many of us have just latched back onto life as if it's normal. But I think it really benefits us to stop and think about how COVID affected us and what we were going through at that time. At least I personally was deeply affected, although I was busy all the time. In fact, I was worryingly busy all the time. I didn't have time to stop and reflect on the meaning of what we were going through. And some of the really core things about that period, which is why I think the term shock temporality is absolutely true, is because we were suspended in time and place with no sense of future. We were in an everlasting present, dealing with the moment. And when you think about people who have suffered migration or who have suffered natural disasters, this is the state in which they are thrust. All of us are able to live in the present because we have a sense of the future which is kind of guiding the present, is acting back on us in the present. But during COVID, the future was suspended. And we were just stuck in the present. And at that time, I also realized the implication of being immobilized in your own home, being unable to move out and experience the world, being confined to four walls, very confinement. A lot of the shock of that period and its dislocating effect had to do with this kind of spatial confinement and temporal disruption. So I think that was a tremendous moment of profound change. And that experience really made evident how much the things that we take for granted, which is movement, our own sense of who we are and our sense of agency and purpose in the world derives from our ability to move. Although we were in touch with each other through technology, we were even attending classes online, but still something fundamental in the nature of our other 200 years ago. That's the kind of commentary that we are associating with the present climate moment in India. The third change is political intensification. The normative basis of the world seems to be shifting. It seems to be shifting away from democracy and diversity, equity and inclusion. Even science as we know it has been talked about. All this seems to be changing and moving towards strong men who are asserting patriarchal values, which can even justify war. It can justify genocide in Pakistan. It can lead to people rejecting the vaccination program. It can promote technocratic, data-driven centralization, simultaneous loss of privacy and loss of the public, and promoting psychophantasy, filling forms, submitting data, complying to expectations which are highly centralized. So we are in a period of political intensification. I don't think even 5 years ago we would have anticipated this moment in which we find ourselves over the last few years. I think communication is shifting. It's shifting to social media, where humans are constantly broadcasting their lives into some anonymous public. All of us are doing it. In fact, we feel almost compelled to do it. We feel it's natural to do. And if we're not there in that space, we wonder if we even exist. Like, I mean, so many times I think, oh, should I start using Twitter? Because everybody seems to have to be there in order to exist. Right? So this force and pressure of new communication technologies, which are ultimately controlled by algorithms of powerful individuals or political or capitalist groups who are using algorithms to manipulate us. Definitely over the last 5 years, we are in that space. Again, AI is bringing very fundamental shifts in our assumptions about human cognition, about our ability for higher order thinking and doing, making real the possibility that we will outsource repetitive manual work, and we may even outsource creative cognitive work into these new technologies. And finally, the idea of gig work, where casualization of work is becoming very normal. Even educated workers are having to find work through the gig space. Even this is happening at a time when actually the world is becoming more educated. We have far more graduates today than we had even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even in India. So something very fundamentally even about the nature of work, which was an identity forming phase in our lives, that is undergoing a change because of the overtaking of gig work in our lives. I was shocked to learn that 40% of China's workforce is employed through gig. Can you believe it? 40% of the workforce in a country like China is finding its work opportunity through gig. They are not employed. They're finding work through gig. So I think we have to think about these. So I've just put out 6 very fundamental shifts to you. And now that I've started creating a list, maybe you want to add more to that list. I'm alluding only to these 6 dramatic changes in the last 5 years. And I think that will give you a sense of the profound change that I'm referring to in which we find ourselves. Alvin Toffler referred to this exponential way in which change takes place as like future shock. The future is hitting you in the present. It's not like you're going into the future is actually entering into the present. For countries like ours, we're just barely 75 years out of 200 years of colonization. In fact, until 5 years ago, all our discussions was about meeting our commitments to equality, equity, universalization, right? Suddenly our discourse and priorities are getting affected because the future seems to be now in the present. So we barely grapple with the core problems of our school education system. And this new changes seem to offer us tantalizing possibilities of solving old problems. But at the same time, the changes also seem to suggest something catastrophic. The change seems to be happening at a rate faster than we can assimilate, either as individuals or as institutions or as systems. So I think the notion of the pace at which things are changing is important for us to recognize and to give us here we find ourselves amid techno managers, edupreneurs who are forcing the pace, telling us what to do, how to do, and we seem to have little time to think about why we should do it. Now we're thinking about the what in the house is reduced to reactive kind of responses. We're not acting and shaping the way we want things to go. We're reacting to the pace of change being defined by others. So I really want to use this talk for us to stop and to reflect. And I think as people involved in the business of education, I don't think we should just accept a situation in which we are reacting to decisions and changes being made elsewhere. We should equally be able to reflect on and at least try to have a view on the direction of change or try to define it. One of my friends, Malati, many years ago, in a very powerful way told me once, I don't want to react, I want to act. And frequently that idea comes back to me. I don't think we should just be reacting to situations in which we are placed. We should give ourselves the opportunity to think and act. So with that brief introduction, let me come to the first part of my talk, in which I want to really engage with this idea of change a little bit more. I already shared with you some of these dramatic changes. But now let me try to unpack the shape of tomorrow it seems to be emerging. And I just want to work on three ideas that we've been working on in this study, which we've been calling future learns. I want to think a little bit about climate change. I want to think a little bit about AI. And I want to think a little bit about the future of work. So let's pause to think about climate change. It's frequently been pointed out that South Asia, and particularly India, is probably the seventh most affected regions in terms of climate change in the whole world. So climate change is going to affect us very, very profoundly. We're going to be the seventh most affected regions of the world. You just have to think about our coastline. You have to think about the Himalayas and the glaciers. You have to think about global warming and ocean levels rising. You have to think about desertification, prolonged drought, floods. All these are going to increase in the next decade or two. I don't want to be a doomsday predictor, but I'm saying we must be prepared that climate changes are changing the world as we know it in quite profound ways. One study found that in the year 2020, 36% of all children below the age of 18 have experienced either intense heat wave, and that this is likely to rise to 100% by 2030. Everybody is going to experience the effects of climate, especially things like heat wave. Climate change is going to lead to changes in educational continuity. It's going to lead school cycles being disrupted. It's going to increase migration and distress migration. The agricultural output is also going to be affected. And the threat of food security is going to rise. Just think about it. For every 1 degree rise in temperature, 10% of surface water evaporates. That's the meaning of climate change on agriculture. Most of Indian agriculture is still rain-fed. Imagine if the water is being lost by the earth at the rate of 10% for 1 degree rise. It's going to affect crops and it's going to affect productivity. It's going to affect food security. And vulnerable groups are going to be disproportionately affected by changes. We may feel in the city we are protected. We may be annoyed by unseasonal rainfall which blocks subways, and that's the only way we experience climate change. Actually, the implication of climate change is this kind of deep distress. It's going to alter and impact educational access, quality, and equality. We're all likely to see more absenteeism in our classrooms. We're going to see a lot of loss of instructional time because of disruption. I think those of us in Delhi already know loss of instructional time. We just have to accept that this is going to be a part of our reality and it's going to continue to grow. It's not going to be a problem that will get solved because it can't be solved in any simple way. Children are going to spend more time at home and in distressing contexts. So even as teachers, we will have some responsibility for the fact that they are in home and in distress at home. School infrastructure as we know it is going to change. Even access to safe drinking water is going to become more difficult. We're already experiencing loss of air quality, increasing exposure to hazards by students. We're likely to see an increase in disruptions of education as we know it. School as a space which offers children and adolescents access to social services and safety, this is going to be affected over time. Children may not just be able to reach our schools. And actually for children of the poor, school is a safe space where they get away from a lot of distress and violence that they experience at home. And the need, but this is going to happen precisely at a time when children are going to need more support with issues of mental health and so on. So you can argue that even today's schools are not equipped to deal with these kinds of issues. But my response to you is going to be that we're going to look at a situation in which these vulnerabilities are simply going to get more and more difficult to ignore. Right? We can't say it's somebody else's job. I think we have to start preparing to think about these as being a part of the things for which we are responsible as custodians of children. Let's look at AI. When discussing Human Development Report of 2025, the UNDP says it identifies 3 areas as being very core to what it means to be fully human and to experience the benefits of human development. The one is capabilities, the other is functioning, and the third is agency. Probably you recognize capabilities and functioning as coming from Amartya Sen's conceptualization of human capability. Absolutely. UNDP is conceptualizing capabilities, functioning, which means ability to realize a capability and perform it. And the third is agency, which is the sense of purposiveness and direction. That these are the 4 pillars of human formation and action. And the UNDP argues that AI should be aligned with this. But when we think of AI entering into human lives, we should think and ask ourselves, how is AI going to contribute capability? How is it going to interact with and contribute to human functioning? And how is it going to interact with and contribute to human agency? And the argument that UNDP says that AI should be aligned to this and it should expand human capabilities. It should enable functionings to develop and it should enable students to exercise, humans to exercise agency. But AI is a very new kind of technology and we need to wrap our heads around this technology specifically. It mimics human cognition. It mimics human cognitive capabilities and it constitutes a very fundamental shift from conventional EdTech as we know it. It moves from simply capturing data to detecting patterns. It moves from providing access to instructional resources, actually making decisions and automating decisions and automating instructions. Generative AI stands out as a technology, given vast access that it has to knowledge, and it surpasses human performance, even in complex cognitive tasks. We are limited by a working memory, but generative AI is not. So I think when we think of AI, we must understand the nature of this technology with which we are working and also recognize that it is fundamentally shifted from technologies that we have known in the past. It is really a very new way of, a new kind of technology. Now you might argue that all technologies interact with human cognition. When I was thinking to myself that even the fact that I write has affected the way I think. In fact, I'm not able to think without writing anymore. When I want to think, I start writing. Right? So a technology of writing has entered into my cognition and is actually altering the way I cognize, arguably enhancing my cognition. Because I feel I'm a better thinker when I write. Think of AI like that. Right? So no technology just stands out there. Every technology enters into your cognition and alters who you are and what you're capable of, just the way in which writing does. Think of AI entering into your cognition like that. It is equally going to now alter your ability to cognize. And we need to grapple with what that means. We need to grapple with how how it is enhancing, in what way, and then what do we attribute to the person, what do we attribute to AI? Is it even meaningful to make that distinction? I mean, I don't make a distinction between what I think and what I write. It's a part of me. My writing act is a part of me. So is the AI use also equally a part of the person? And is that how we should think about AI? I think really AI use as a technology has to be understood in this very fundamental, foundational way in which it is entering into and interacting with our cognition. The teacher, the learner, the subject matter has traditionally been the heart of, I call it a triad, at the heart of any pedagogical practice, through which teachers and pedagogical effort achieves educational purposes in terms of learning content, learning concepts, experiencing pedagogical intent, leading to the formation of attitudes and values of learners towards themselves as learners, towards fellow learners, and towards the subject matter. In other words, this triad, the teacher, the learner, the subject matter, has been the basic triad around which we have built our epistemic culture. Now consider all this stands to be altered with the entry of AI into these relationships. And AI could be entering into this triad at any point. It could be that the student experiences teacher plus AI as the pedagogy. It could be that the teacher is experiencing student plus AI as the epistemic subject. Right? What is red reading meaning in this kind of situation? When we are working with students, a student plus AI, what does it mean to be working in the zone of proximal development? Alexander has pointed out to us that pedagogy is action and intention. Right? It's the work, it's what is manifesting along with the intent which is behind that manifestation. If AI is a part of the pedagogy, and now it's even deciding and defining the pedagogy, can we attribute intent to it? Students' epistemic identity would alter. Typically, the student's epistemic identity includes self-knowledge as a learner, it includes motivations, it includes personal traits like making effort to learn, being willing to practice, being willing to repeat, the self-recognition of having knowledge or competence, as well as recognizing and responding to epistemic authority. It also includes aspects of managing one's own learning. Consider how all of these aspects, which are a part of students' epistemic identity, is likely to shift when AI enters in and becomes integrated into the person who is the learner. It's almost like the learner is now learner plus AI, like a cyborg. Yeah, technology-infused learners, technology-infused teachers. Immediately we can see there are implications of this for equity at the very least. Because it could be that the cyborg that you are depends on the device through which you are accessing AI. Are you accessing AI through a computer or a laptop? Are you accessing it through a mobile phone? It's going to alter the way you access and experience AI. So it's who you are and the kind of cyborg your learner you're going to be is going to be affected by the kind of device that you can afford. It's going to be affected by the kind of AI you can subscribe to and which product of AI you are actually having access to, which you can afford. All these are now going to directly affect your composite competence and your capability. There could be positive implications. In fact, many of us already see it in our students. We are seeing, for example, students who find it difficult to articulate effectively in English using AI and becoming competent. Really, their intelligence is showing through because they're no longer hampered by the poor English that they were using earlier. But they experience our students very differently now that they're using AI to mediate their interaction with us. Many of us are hearing talk about how AI can personalize learning much more so that it becomes much more sensitive to our individual needs and our individual differences. But at the same time, we are very adult, we don't know what does our assessment of the student assignment represent to you? What are we assessing when we assess our student assignments? Some of my colleagues have been considering how to acknowledge the use of AI in the picture and educate students to use AI more effectively. In fact, that's what I've been hearing also happens in China's universities. All the programs are integrating AI use into the learning process because they're saying this is going to be a reality of the world into which students are going to graduate. It's better to bring it in now into the classroom and learn how to use it. But then the question is, will education need to shift away from construction of knowledge by learners to managing AI in constructing knowledge? What does that shift actually mean? When the learner is no longer the constructor of knowledge, but the learner is managing AI as a constructor of knowledge. Will learning disciplines, which is a cumulative epistemic and cultural work over years of schooling and higher education, will that become irrelevant? I feel this is an educational emergency with deep psychological, social, and epistemic implications. And we need to wrap our heads around these fundamental shifts that we are poised to experience, which is going to affect what I call the tacit substratum of education. The assumptions on which we have been going around our educational business, that is going to fundamentally shift. Imagine if epistemic identity is shifting, if epistemic culture is getting altered, if what is valuable in building epistemic culture is getting affected, if our idea of constructing knowledge is getting affected. Right? This is the tacit substratum. Tacit meaning it's unspoken, it's in the realm of assumptions, and it's substratum. In other words, we build our educational project on this, and this is shifting. I think we have to recognize that it's shifting, and we have to learn how to adapt to it. Finally, the world of work, and I will only briefly discuss the world of work. I won't spend too much on it, except that I think we all recognize that a very fundamental shift is taking place with regards to work and employment. Our identities, at least in my generation, our identities were shaped by our employers. And we worked in institutions to whom we belonged and labored for years, and this shaped our identity. This has been true for both blue-collar and white-collar workers. Both forms of work, as well as skills, knowledge, competencies. Skills, knowledge, and competencies that have contributed to our employability as we have known it in the past, this is shifting. The World Economic Forum, looking at jobs of the future 2020, in its 2025 report, noted there was already a marked decrease in jobs that need skill, manual dexterity, that need endurance, that need precision. Already such jobs are decreasing. And it noted a strong positionality with reflexivity and being aware of the consequences of our attitudes, choices, and behaviors on others, and being aware of the problem. Right? So this kind of an intrapersonal competence is something that as future teachers we should be thinking about from the point of view of our learners. Another competence which we rarely talk about in the space of school, which has emerged very strongly, is a competence being referred to as action competence. We've typically thought of school as a time for preparation for action. We're being asked to bring the idea of action into school. So it's not enough to just prepare for action. We actually need to be able to act, to have the competence to act. This includes the ability and the competence to plan, to implement, as well as the practical skills that are involved when you actually act in the world, like managing emotions, managing concerns of others, being able to act autonomously or act in groups. This kind of action competence is emerging as something which is important. The other is this idea of a normative competence. Now, the word normative really means being able to distinguish between right and wrong. So you could think of it as a value. You should have values. Normative competence is the ability to experience empathy, to experience solidarity, to develop understanding of transnational and transcultural values and learning. In other words, it's a much more dynamic version of values. It's more like moral reasoning and making that into an active competence. And to be able to overcome cognitive imperialism, which means this confidence that I know and others don't. Another competence is future thinking. And this really struck me as a very important, significant competence. It includes competencies that we are familiar with, the ability to evaluate, analyze, but it also includes ability to craft rich pictures of the future in which we have factored in the kinds of issues to which the future must address, and to infuse in it problem-solving frameworks, to have access to alternate models of development, not to be stuck with the model that we are familiar with, but to have knowledge that there are other ways in which development and progress can happen. And to also have consideration of how the local region would look different in relation to the future. We notice that these competencies that are being referred to, these are not just being talked about as abstract competencies that we need to have and need to develop for schooling, but these are really situated in particular locations and in relation to particular cultures and communities. And I think in this also, the call for this kind of education is different from what we are used to doing here. Generally, especially in cities, we may contextualize, but we are basically preparing learners to work anywhere, to be mobile and to be situated wherever they are and make sense of life. The development of these competencies is requiring that learners and the teacher locate themselves in specific geographies. So this kind of pedagogy is very unique. It's being referred to as place-based pedagogy, in which you adopt the concerns of the geographic location along with its history, economy, culture into your relationship with it. And your pedagogy is really situating you in this very rich way into particular locations. It is also expecting that we will embody these competencies. If they are not just to be in the mind, but then we have to be able to do it. So education cannot be only about developing cognitively. It will have to be developing the somatic ability to do things. And so it's giving attention to the physical person and the performance. It's not just experiential learning. I hope you're getting the difference. It's not just about getting better concepts through experiential learning. It's really about embodying and that making a difference to your functioning and your agency. That's really what we are asking for and calling for. Keeping this framework in mind, some of my colleagues actually examined the curriculum which we have today in both teacher education and in class 5. And I think, just to use the time, I'll very briefly share with you some of the findings that they found when they examined the curriculum through this lens. To what extent are the curriculum of today developing these kinds of competencies? It seemed that rather than all school subjects taken, so this was from grade 5 curriculum analysis that Poonam did. She found that rather than all subjects feeling that they have a responsibility to develop these kinds of competencies, these were being disproportionately being allocated to only EVS and science, as if the other subjects don't have a responsibility for these kinds of competencies. Again, EVS and English seem to provide opportunities for critical thinking, creativity, and reasoning. And students seem to be receiving some kind of exposure to questions of sustainability and a moderate exposure to understanding equity. However, opportunities of thinking about how to promote well-being were very limited. And students had extremely very limited exposure to ideas of democratic society or about human rights or child rights. By far, worst she found mathematics textbooks. She felt that mathematics textbooks almost seem to neglect everything in favor of just cognitive competencies. Overall, the ability to develop future-oriented competencies seem to be very limited in the school curriculum. And sustainability was approached more through a duties framework rather than through a rights or an ethical framework. There were also very limited opportunities to use systems lenses to understand the relationships of institutions to each other or the dependencies in interaction. Looking at teacher education curriculum, Ruchi noted that, and in fact this is something we also found in our study of sustainable mountain futures, that in fact teacher education curriculum seemed to be far thinner in addressing the ability of teachers to understand this kind of concerns and to have capabilities towards them. Teacher education seemed to orient teachers towards working with community on issues of sustainability, or engaging with futures, or understanding the democratic society, appreciation of Asubaiva, Kumbhaka, and so on. These were very, very weakly developed in the teacher education curriculum. So with this, I'll just come to the last part of my talk, and I will conclude with two ideas that I want to discuss with you in conclusion. The first is just the idea of being a teacher in this kind of a future in the school. And I don't want to go into what we do as teachers. I mean, in this, I don't want to discuss teaching so much as being a teacher in this kind of a situation. I feel that we must become prepared that the entry of gig kind work is going to affect the schooling system far more fundamentally. Today, it has already affected subjects like computer teacher, they are outsourced. It's also affecting physical education and music teacher, even those are getting outsourced. We have to be prepared that this can become far more pervasive. Already tutors are part of the gig tutoring business, isn't it? They're fixed up with clients, literally on an hourly basis. We could well see the profession of teaching being affected similarly. So I want us to think about that. And think about what are the implications of that for ourselves as teachers. We may of course protest it and we may fight to prevent it from happening. But we may find ourselves in situations where that is the only way we should get to teach. That is the form in which employment is being offered to us. We may well see ourselves placed as gig teachers. The one idea that research on the gig economy is drawing our attention to this has already affected many kinds of work. Right? And people are already thinking about what does that mean to be a programmer in this space? How do you get your sense of identity and purpose for your profession if you're not in some institutional setting? And we point out that professional identity and an occupational group is going to be much more important and relevant to us as compared to our institution in which we work. In other words, we as a community of teachers, our interactions with each other and our ability to make sense of what we are doing, this is going to be the primary reference for us, not the place where we go to work. Right now, the school is kind of defining your agenda. We may well find ourselves in the school just notionally there, and our agenda will have to be defined by our occupational group, which is enabling us to think about what is worth doing and what is the best way to do it. So I think it's really interesting and an important area. As teachers, the only way in which we meet as a community are in unions maybe. But we have to think about an occupational group outside our employment through which we find and define where our profession is going, and through which we retain our sense of professional identity and also retain our sense of purpose, professional purpose and method. Even learning to adapt to the changes in the institutional space will be enabled by the occupational group. So I really think as we are graduating and we are going to become teachers, we must, if it doesn't already exist or it's there in some nascent form, we have to amplify occupational discussion for ourselves as teachers. We may become members of unions of teachers who will represent our voice, but we must ensure that these unions also look at occupational aspects of our work, not only our service conditions. So we will have to think about that as we go into the future. And the second part, our work as teachers and the business of teaching itself. For this, I almost, when I want to think about teaching these days, I go back to the right to education. And let me tell you why I go back to that right, in order to find my normative direction for teaching. I go back to that right because uniquely in the Indian case, the right to education is sitting in the right to life. So as teachers, we must never forget that we acquire our professional purpose from the right to life. In other words, when we teach, we're enabling somebody to enjoy their life. And that's our purpose. We're enabling them to responsibility. Our work will not be limited to simply delivering content. More demands will be placed on us. We will have greater responsibility for the well-being of the students. And we will indeed be responsible for their rights in this very broad sense of right to life. I think as teachers we should embrace that responsibility and we should really convert that into our source of power and agency because we are responsible, especially as elementary school teachers. I think we are profoundly responsible for the lives of children because the very right under which we work is coming from the right to life. So I think that's important. The right to life is really right to life with dignity. So we are responsible for human formation which enables people to enjoy life with dignity. And I think if we think about our work like that, we will understand the importance of what we do and how we go about it. I think definitely the idea of place-based pedagogy is going to become more important for us. We will have to take we should be thinking about our work more from this idea of how do we enable through our pedagogy to locate our students where they are, which doesn't mean limiting them to where they are, but deriving ability to be fully human from where you are. So I think this is really important for us to begin to think about how shall we practice and build teaching and enhancing opportunity for place-based pedagogy. The second is that we will have to accept that we will have to continue to learn to learn. And it's going to be a given in our lives as teachers. Things are going to be changing and we will have to continuously adapt to change. So part of our occupational task, I think, is to make sure that we have robust opportunities to continue to learn. We don't want people telling us to learn this, learn that. We should be able to decide what is valuable for us to learn from where we are. So this learning and adaptation will have to become a part of how we think of ourselves as teachers. We will have to accept and keep up with technology. There's just no escape from it. We cannot be adapt. We may not have very little to do with it, but we should still know it and then decide we will have little to do with it. It cannot be from a position of ignorance. It has to be from a well-informed position, our relationship with technology. So no escape. Like literacy was no escape from literacy, there's no escape from technology. And I think we must accept it and work with it. I think our focus will also have to shift away from knowledge and disciplines towards the formation of critical competencies in our students. Because I think with the entry of AI into all our lives, our relationship with knowledge and epistemic work is changing. So we must understand that in relation to competence and bring greater focus on competence. So when I say competence, I mean competences like normative competence, futures-oriented competence, action competence. We have to enhance and focus our teaching on the development of competence. We also have to integrate greater with our students' home lives and interact more with parents. Because I think when we think of place-based pedagogy, that pedagogy may be enacted in the space of the school, it may be also getting enacted in the place of the child's home or in some other space. There may be multiple places where our pedagogical work will be enacted. So I think we must now expand our notion of the sites where we will be teachers. We may not be teachers only in the space of school. Our teaching may be mediated now through technology. Our teaching may now extend into the child's home. It's quite possible that in these situations, that's where the child is situated. And you're not actually meeting. So we have to now, I think, open up our imagination to a much wider notion of what are those classrooms and what are those pedagogical sites. And therefore, the importance of integrating community and parents specifically into an imagination of pedagogical spaces. Yes, so with that I've come here for my 3 parts. And I'm happy to discuss any of these ideas with you. Thank you.
most welcome. It's ask, share. Questions? Anything? Anything?
Yeah, I was thinking about this basic pedagogy. If we I was thinking about this terminology, place-based pedagogy, and was wondering that if we move towards this idea, don't you think we risk giving into the demands of the technological companies, because identities require a state of being, and place-based pedagogy would mean that you would be shifting from one place to another. Am I right to put it like that?
I don't know, do we want to take a few observations?
Yeah.
There are others.
That is doubling law, and I was just thinking that the way pointed to objective about where we should go in education, like having the North Star and thinking of which direction moving. I wonder the policy, because think of any of these, or in general, do we have any other objective about which path to walk to? Because the way you pointed out, it was so real, they are so right there right now on our faces. To think that this is what we have to respond to is something to really think about it. And yes, it tells us which way as to take us, good, which direction. And
my question was based of place-based pedagogy. You were speaking of place-based pedagogy, locating the positionality of the learner. So, place-based pedagogy, how is that different from when we speak of critical pedagogy and when we are locating a certain learner in their space, and we say that we will use this learner's context in the classroom, or we will use that as a resource? Then how is that different from place-based pedagogy?
So, first your question about, are we giving in and what do we do about shifting places? I think if that is the reality of shifting places, then that's fine. Place-based pedagogy has to be responsive to shifting places. But the point is we're always placed somewhere. It's not like we are virtual. Right? So it's really recognizing that we are situated in a geographic sense, but it's not just a place. It's not just a point in space. It has culture. It has sociality. Right? It has all these other dimensions to which we are responding. And again, we're not looking at place also in some kind of a neutral way. We may well think of it, through the lens of power, recognizing difference, recognizing the inequality within the space. So it's not like a problem-free space when we're looking in space. In fact, we're factoring in problematics and finding the ability to act as well in green space pedagogy. So I feel, in a way, you're concerned, it could address it in that. But obviously, it's not going to complicate our problem statement itself if place itself is shifting.
Right, and even the identity formation, it requires a state of being, right? I mean, if, which probably Jigyasa is also referring to, that learner, I mean, the very identity of learner would require a certain state of being.
Absolutely. So place-based learning is actually recognizing that. And it's asking you also to recognize identity in a more complete sense. In other words, we're not only, when we bring a child into the classroom, in a way we're able to suspend many other realities from which the child is coming. In the classroom, so the epistemic identity in the classroom is actually filtered. In some ways it's even an advantage. I've learned to think about how it empowers to keep in the background some aspects of our identity and heighten certain others in the classroom. It's empowering. But we have to consider that the complexity of situated identity also needs to become a part of our pedagogical project. So it is recognizing that. And absolutely, I completely concur with you. In fact, one of the difficulties of COVID and what people in emergencies experience is precisely that whole identity formation gets affected.
Right. Suspension.
You're not able to experience place.
Right.
You can't experience place.
Right.
You feel temporarily there.
Right.
So the sense of temporariness affects your ability to.
Right.
Again, you don't want to say this is some deficit person. You just have to realize that this is the context of that person formation that we now need to respond to.
Suspension of being.
Yeah, so it is very much, recognizing being in a profound action-oriented sense. With regards to direction, I think that, Amy Gutman's formulation is very useful. She says that when we have to think about education, we must consider the three agents in the picture. The state, the parents, and the professional educator. And the purpose of education is our interaction of the three. And I think that's really what we should remind ourselves. The state may be incapable of thinking of direction like this because it is bound by other kind of political interests, which are its purposes. Maybe from time to time it shows evidence of it, but it cannot in any dependable way do it, the state. Right? So I think these are really, therefore, as professional educators, we have to see this as a part of our responsibility and equally responsible for this direction setting as much as the policy maker. With regards critical, yes, you're right. I haven't thought about the idea of critical pedagogy, but you're right. Critical pedagogy equally is action-oriented. And it wants you to recognize the present with the view of acting on it, not just as a cognitive exercise. It's actually an action-oriented cognition, which is very central to critical pedagogy. In fact, that's part of the reason why it's very problematic to think of how we do critical pedagogy within institutions. It seems to belong in political space, not in institutional spaces, right? So it's partly coming from that kind of thinking. It's related to, I would say, critical pedagogy, but it's moving beyond that. It's not just altering your social condition, but it's actually, in a way, making you more responsible for where you are and others around you. So it's actually accepting responsibility for place, which is being suggested in place-based pedagogy as well. And I think it's coming from sustainability, so we can see that. I mean, we cannot exit this earth and go somewhere else. We better make sure that where we are able to achieve sustainability. Right? So it's kind of saying there's no exit. So you embrace your place and you work with it. That's the kind of idea that place-based pedagogy is kind of pushing to the future. I know this. Yes.
When we talk about the skill set that is required now and the demands in the market, even to talk about the World Economic Forum reports of 2025, I feel this fear as a teacher educator that are we catering that skill set through teacher education programs in various colleges and institutions across the country? Right? Because if we are not catering to that, are we going to invite less ignited, less critical minds in the teacher education, which is again going to impact the future of teacher education and the schools. Because the critical teacher has to be there in the schools to prepare children for the change. So are we inviting such minds? Because if we cater to the skill set, then we need to change a lot of things in the teacher curriculum. The second fear that I have, when I see a lot of changes in the teacher education curriculum, and are we compromising with the underlying ethos of teacher education programs, which is more empathetic, being empathetic towards the learner, working with the communities, locating the child in the going to compromise on that? Am I going to be less human if I look at developing those skill sets through each education program? So it becomes a vicious circle. Should we look at developing that skill set in our program? Or if we do that, are we compromising on the underlying ethos of the entire teacher education program? It's a complex situation and it's a circle. It's a vicious circle. So any your suggestions, your thoughts on that?
So I brought up the World Economic Forum just to give us a sense of how many of the competencies that are very important today are going to shift. The requirement for them is going to shift. Right? So it's not to say that we must cater to what the World Economic Forum is deciding as their future jobs, but just the awareness that this is shifting and changing. And these are not like, so many of the things that we take as essential may be less essential in the future. Not simply because of employability, but we cannot forget employability either. Right? I don't think we can be fully human without being employed. But I think the perspective of the competencies that I was speaking about, I hope they're coming more from a human development lens than an employability lens alone. So I think if we can take them both into account, then we will probably continue to be able to work towards a more holistic human formation rather than not. But I think technology, whether it's needed for the workplace or its life, I think there's no escape from learning to work.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the debating talk. It was definitely very thought-provoking and quite relevant to the times that we are in. My question is that, as a teacher, how do we work our way through the dichotomies that are there? So, in the beginning, we did talk about this idea of how education should be a preparation of life itself, and at the same time, we also want it to be future-oriented, and we want AI to complement learning and not to replace it. So, we're faced with a very difficult situation at times when the learner would copy some work from AI, or in a way we feel that it's limiting possibilities, it's curbing creativity. So, as a teacher, where do we draw the line?
I must confess, I have no idea. I really don't know where the line is or how to start drawing it again. But I feel that if you don't work with it, you're never going to figure out whether it's a line or a dotted line. I really feel we don't know. We have not actually actively worked with it and talked about warfare experience and built a discourse around it. We haven't done it. I think we're having some limited experience, but we've not brought it into professional discourse more systematically. I think we need to do that. I think we should have a lot of, this is really the stuff for action research. And we should be doing that. Probably in the fourth year of part of BNL, we should insist that at least one unit is taught with AI in the picture. Either it's a cyborg teacher or the cyborg learner. But the AI is there. And we're using it and everything. I think we should just start doing it now. And discovering, when is it working, what is its affordance, what are we judging when we make a judgment. I think we should just have these kinds of experiences. Actively build them in. And absolutely, we should do it. We shouldn't be told by somebody how to use AI. Let AI make a lesson plan. Before that happens, let's figure out, what is that lesson plan when I use AI? And where is it making a difference? And am I able to use it for critical issues that I want to address in the classroom? Maybe we should really run those experiments ourselves and actively bring it into our own preparation. So we should have some perspective through our use on it.
AR and VR. Students are already bringing in AI into lesson planning.
Yes.
And they're not working at all.
So we must figure out why it is not working and we have to say it.
Yeah.
And maybe there are cases where it has worked better. So if we can have a more discriminated discussion on it, I think we will definitely benefit. These are going to be fuzzy lines, is my suspicion. But they should be a part of our occupational discourse. Yes.
Hello. I have a question, and we are talking about tomorrow's school, where there's technology and we have curriculum. Personally, I'm in Korea, where we can launch good school. वहाँ पे a lot of learners, who are first generation learners, and not like very well placed in the education system. क्या हम एक ऐसी country में जहाँ पे education जो हमारे लेवल पे वो प्रॉपर्ली बच्चों तक नहीं पहुंच रही है, we can talk about the existence of tomorrow's school, और is it like हम जो आगे की बात कर रहे हैं उस एजुकेशन में क्या हम एक वाइड गैप क्रिएट कर रहे हैं विद tomorrow's school?
और आपका जवाब क्या है कि हाँ गैप क्रिएट हो रहा है? बिल्कुल सही बात है, गैप जरूर है ना, बढ़ेगा। तो इसलिए when we speak about tomorrow's schools, we cannot forget the equity question, and its access to resource will continue to bother us. कि आपको कौन से डिवाइस मिल रहा है स्कूल में काम करने के लिए, स्कूल में वाईफाई है, टीचर को कह रहे हैं कि आप AI यूज करो, पर टीचर को खुद अपना डेटा खरीद रही है, कोई प्रोविजन नहीं है डेटा के लिए। तो ये इनइक्वालिटीज को परसिस्ट करेगी, but nobody is waiting for us to catch up to the present in order to face the future. The future is here. I think it's here. Rather than people telling us how equity will be solved by AI, let us figure out how we think equity will be solved, not be told by some educator. ये AI यूज कर लो और टीचर की जरूरत नहीं है, एक्सपर्ट AI हो जाएगा।
Thank you for this insightful talk. So first thing is, when you said about education being conservative, and it is slow to change, but especially in a country like India, where edtech markets are coming up, and they come with this huge resource, and government is also giving them opportunity to set up. So where does this place our teachers? They are the agency that they have is further depleting. So I would like to hear your insights on that. And another thing is, you spoke about our textbooks not having, so you especially gave the example of math textbook not having a future-oriented competency. If you can elaborate on what do you mean by that, that would be helpful. Then this thing about gig culture that is said, this is not a new thing. This has been going on since a long time. This is not with the arrival of technology or after COVID, but this has been happening for long, with especially the examples of arts or music. We have had teachers with computers like that. And another thing which I want to hear from you is with this many countries, many developed countries are moving technology out of their classroom and going back to textbooks and pen, paper, that kind of setting. While in India, this edtech is bringing in a different, the market, the capital is different. So if you could shed some light on these.
So what's the difference between contractualization and part-time teachers and gig? I think gig is really partly platformization of work management. You can literally be, it's like the actual example which is equivalent to gig is sometimes in the morning, if you be very early in the morning, in corners of the road, you will see casual laborers sitting. And the lorry will come and pick up. I need 10 workers, so 10 will jump in and go and come. Right? That's actually the physical version of gig. That is gig, which is different from the art teacher, perhaps who was asked to come in. It was a part-time job, but she nevertheless had an institution to which she was going. This is going to intensify. Teachers are going to be like those people sitting on the side of the road. We go literally on a daily basis that school needs a chemistry teacher for 2 hours, 9 class. Gig economy enables that to happen. And that's the kind of casualization, which means you don't have a work contract. So, how do you know that you are a teacher? Because of your qualification. That's how you know you are a teacher. So, when you find your identity as a teacher, then qualification is not enough. I mean, usually we know our identity from our performative work as teachers. change fundamentally for us. We're not going to have neither job security. I don't know where I'm going to teach tomorrow. Or how long I'll be doing it. I have no clue. So this is going to impact into our identities as professionals. I'm thinking we must really wrap our head around how will we be professionals in this kind of situation. Can we be professionals in this kind of scenario? And I think, yeah, maybe in some countries, there are plumbers who find their professional identity from the plumbing community, which is exchanging professional knowledge and keeping the system going and getting job work. But there is still a systematic way in which their knowledge is upgraded, where they learn new skills, the new technologies that are entering into their development. So maybe let's somehow think and reimagine the possible futures in which we will be teachers. Right? Rather than allow ourselves to get atomized and simply be seen through the label that we do. Is there some meaning and relevance to professional identity, professional recognition in this kind of situation? I think that's what we really need to do. Earlier I used to think that something unique about teaching is that you can't be a teacher unless you're in a school. So being in a school is essential to being a teacher. So that institutional role is so much part of the teacher's identity. I think that is likely to be shifted and changed. We may not like the change, but we may not be able to do anything about it. So I think that's what I was thinking about when I talked about how this is something different from what has been going on in the past. It's been happening in other sectors. We never thought it would enter into sectors which are dependent on higher qualifications. Agency of teacher, I forget the point that we were making. I need to get down. I'm defeated by my own notes. I don't know what you asked first about agency. If you want to repeat as well. We are not a powerful community. We are not a very powerful community. We are very, what do you find, constantly political challenge to the community. We don't have much voice in these spaces. We just have to make it difficult for these people to get away with the bad choices that we make. Right? That's, I think, our main business. We have to bring out the evidence. We should find our voice and articulate it. I think bad decisions will continue to be made. We just have to make it difficult for people to make bad decisions. And I think that is the least that we can do as members of the profession.
Hello, I have one question. While you were talking about your research work, I just wanted to, I do not know if you do not have time to elaborate on it's like a research gap, but it might can you elaborate on the of resource allocation per se, because when you talk about climate crisis, when you talk about unemployment, all of these point out the fact that poverty at this point, the resource allocation that is happening, it's not getting happening equitably. So you did talk about the right to life and right to education connection, and the fact that by out of Delhi, that's when we realized how different teaching does work. So what about the students that are outside the capitals, and especially when we have reports such as, let's say, in UP or states outside Delhi, there is a mass shutdown on government schooling. So how will the future of schooling will look for the rural spaces or the spaces where AI they've never even heard of it?
In fact, that's partly what we're doing in the research study. We have a survey component in it. We are actually mapping both availability of infrastructure as it exists today, which includes computer labs, access to Wi-Fi, and it's also looking at knowledge of AI, experience of AI. Also, whether the students have these kind of devices at their home. So maybe you're not accessing it in school, but you're accessing it in the home space. Okay? And we are finding that the smartphone is pretty pervasive. But we are finding fundamental difference in availability of other kinds of computing devices. Availability of a laptop at your home, there's a clear difference in urban and rural in terms of access to a laptop. So this is kind of giving us, at least in the study, we're going to make it evident that we cannot talk about that's the way in which we are going to at least present findings back in December. But absolutely, I say when inequality, infrastructure is very, very evident.
I mean, talking about states like I recently went to Gijubhai. There just exists a room in the name of a classroom, and the ratios are terrible. There's like 100 students to 8, they don't even have smartphones, very honestly. So what will student look for them? And that is the majority of the case in
I
South
think we know what the answer is. We know what the answer should be. Right? So I think, as I'm saying, this is how to make people, it can make it difficult for people to get away with bad choices and bad decisions. I mean, we cannot talk about fundamental transformation in the education system without wrapping our heads around the way we do this. I mean, the teachers in some sense as infrastructure is an input, right, into the school system. And already, as you're pointing out, in Bihar, the PTOs are atrocious. Completely atrocious. I mean, plotted at the school level, PTOs across India, and India is like shooting off the page, you know, it's on another level of poor PTRs, atrocious PTRs. Absolutely. I just think we have to make those graphs and put them out there much more in the media for us to let us really come and talk about PR making lesson plans, giving teachers. How is that personalized learning going to reach that kid in the classroom? Is it going to reach them on a mobile phone? Is that sharing at home with others? In school, how are they going to access it? I think we have to ask the tough questions. Facebook is saying, so what are you doing VR? I told you, VR sets in every school, 30 VR sets in a school for kids to wear those VR devices and experience. Let's get down to the brass tacks of what it is like in the provisioning end. But I think that even as we do this, we must also experiment and see what does it look like, what could it look like. We should do that bit as well.
I have two questions. One, when we speak of the gig economy, specifically in terms of education, for instance, we were talking about tutoring and coaching. Would you also connect it to the introduction of DPE? And when the funds were taken from the World Bank, around that time is where para-teaching sort of increased a lot. So would you also relate to the gig economy right now to that? That is the first question. The second question being when you spoke of the competencies, the different kinds of competencies. One being the intrapersonal competencies, which requires us to be reflective, and other competencies which were also requiring us to think of our own well-being and also catering to the students' well-being. So very specific intrapersonal competencies. In what workspace have you recognized that these competencies will be required? Workspace. So we were speaking of these in respect of occupation. So in what occupations or in what contexts are these competencies have you recognized that have been required?
So I think if we look at the origins of gig-like work of teachers, I think it actually predates even the degree. I think that the general teachers without qualification have always been part of the Indian education system. And if you look at it historically, the need for professional qualification is fairly recent as a universal requirement. So at the same time, something which I've been looking at professional qualification historically, and what I've realized is that there's always been a tension. There's a lack of conviction that you actually need professional education to teach. It's deeply there in ordinary society, it's deeply there in the minds of policymakers. They don't really think that professional education is needed for the preparation of teaching. Simple thing that teachers, you can start teaching provided you love it. So that, I think that in a way has always been eating away at the ability of the profession to consolidate around the idea of professional qualification. So it's much before the DPP. I think it's a constant struggle that we have not yet won. I mean, we've done it in a formal way in NCT, but we actually socially we have not won that battle. And I dimensions of intrapersonal is also self-awareness of our position as knowers and this idea of cognitive imperialism. This overconfidence that I know. In other words, there is this expert point of view which often leads us to neglecting or dismissing community perspectives. It doesn't mean that community is right and you are wrong, but it just means you cannot ignore it or hope to get away by invoking expertise. I think that's really what it's partly drawing my attention to, and I think much more widely. In fact, I'm struck by it, the return of the folk in all our discourses, right? It's assuming far greater relevance today. Literally today, I mean this last year, I've been hearing so many invocations of the folk as a source of authentic knowledge as compared to the scientist or the expert. So it just means that we have to be much more critically aware of the power that we assume when we claim to be knowers of something, and how it puts us in relation to our community. It actually alienates us from our community frequently when we assume this position of superior knowledge. And I think this entire move is kind of drawing our attention to this tension, which leads to the breakdown of local action and leads to alienation of people from some joint action, which is essential if we want to be able to act on many of these things that are going to be a part of our lives in the future.
Thank you very much, Professor Sarangapani, for the talk which has brought our attention to issues, themes which are a part of our everyday conversations, but the kind of connections it makes with classrooms. For instance, climate change. We talk about it every day, but even as educators, we do not really see the implications of how is it going to transform, how is it likely to transform our classrooms, our relationship with children, and how do we need to reimagine what our teaching and learning should be in these changed circumstances. And AI, again, it's a part of our staff room conversations. We talk about it every day. But yes, we can't wish it away, it's there. And the point you made when you were referring to your friend and you said that, it's not about reaction but actually acting on things. I think an important thought that emerged from your talk today was also about how it's so important to be aware of one's reality, to constantly engage with it, and then to be able to think about it. You were talking about future-based thinking. You were talking about competencies which are going to be very relevant, very important in this very rapidly changing world. The place-based pedagogy seems to be a very interesting idea, and a lot of people had observations and questions about it. I was also reminded about how we talk about the situatedness of literacy, how literacy is thoroughly embedded in a very specific context and takes into account the socio-cultural aspect. So it attends to every detail of the learner's context. I was reminded of that, and it does seem like a very important idea to engage with, because if children are going to be exposed to a lot of changes, it is important that as educators we are aware of those changes and our pedagogy is responsive to that. So thank you so much for your thoughts. and I'm sure all of us will think more about it, engage with it, and we did have a lot of questions and our own thoughts on that. Thank you so much. Now I would just like to bring your attention to the fact that we chose to have the alumni meet on this very day because we thought that many of us